Just 15 minutes after our divorce was finalized, my ex-husband rushed his mistress to her prenatal appointment. In that exact window, I canceled his corporate credit cards, seized his 3 company-leased penthouses and 3 luxury fleet cars, and stripped him of his title as CEO. The next morning, he called me, begging, "Chloe, please forgive me." That morning, Harrison Vance and I officially signed our divorce papers at the Manhattan Supreme Court. The courtroom wasn't noisy. There were no tears, no clinging. He signed so fast I barely had time to register my own signature on the page. Stepping out of the courthouse, Harrison adjusted his tie, his face as nonchalant as if he had just wrapped up a board meeting, not a 7-year marriage. He didn't look back at me once. I stood on the courthouse steps, still clutching my copy of the divorce decree, feeling strangely hollow. 7 years as a wife, all boiled down to a few words terminating our marital status. Before I could even head home, my phone buzzed a text from my assistant about an afternoon meeting. I sighed, about to turn off my phone. When I happened to glance across the street, Harrison was standing there. But he wasn't alone. Beside him was a young woman in a tight white dress, her hand resting gently on her stomach. I recognized her immediately. Mia Lawson, a former marketing associate at our firm. They held hands, not even trying to hide it, and walked straight into the VIP maternity wing of a high-end private clinic on the Upper East Side. I don't know why, but my feet automatically followed them. I stood a few feet away, close enough to hear every word. Harrison spoke to the receptionist, his voice swelling with pride. "My wife is 8 weeks pregnant. Make sure we get the VIP suite." The words "times my wife" times rang out so clearly I thought I had misheard. 8 weeks. I did the math in my head. 8 weeks ago was the exact time he claimed he had to go on a crucial business trip to the West Coast for half a month, followed by sudden emergency meetings. My heart gave a sharp twinge, but it didn't hurt enough to make me cry. It was strange. I just chuckled. Perhaps when you've been betrayed too many times, your tears dry up. Harrison turned his head and caught my eye. He didn't flinch. He wasn't embarrassed. His eyes were ice cold. He looked straight at me and said, "We're divorced. What are you still doing here?" That voice held no trace of the man who had knelt in the pouring rain to propose to me years ago. Mia lightly cradled her belly, leaning into Harrison, and said just loud enough, "Honey, I'm feeling a bit dizzy." The way she looked at me, half pitying, half provoking, made my position in this story crystal clear. I was no longer the wife. I was just the ex, and they were making sure I knew it. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't ask why. I simply pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. The line connected to the corporate finance department of the conglomerate. I spoke slowly, enunciating every word. Cancel all auxiliary corporate cards under the name Harrison Vance. Revoke his access to the 3 company-leased executive penthouses and the 3 corporate vehicles, effective immediately today. Harrison heard me and let out a mocking scoff. "Who do you think you are? Barking orders like that." I looked straight at him, calmer than even I expected. "I am the chairwoman of the board, and as of right now, you are unemployed." Mia froze. Harrison's face lost its color. I knew he never expected me to strike so fast. In his mind, I was still the docile, weak woman who would either cry and beg or suffer in silence. But he forgot one crucial detail. The 3 luxury apartments he lived in, and the 3 Porsches he drove, were all corporate assets belonging to Sterling Holdings, the enterprise I inherited from my father. He was merely the legal proxy, not the owner. Harrison's phone started buzzing frantically. I faintly heard him snapping into the receiver. "What do you mean my card was declined?" Then, another call came through. "Mr. Vance, we've received the resolution, terminating your position as CEO." His face went from pale to a sickly gray. Mia panicked. "Harrison, you said you had everything taken care of." Her unintentional words were a slap to Harrison's ego. He looked at me, the arrogance draining from his eyes, replaced by creeping panic. I turned and walked away without another word. Behind me, I heard him shout, "Chloe! Don't go too far!" I didn't stop. Asterisk. Too far? Asterisk. Is it too far to revoke assets after he held his mistress's hand to a prenatal checkup exactly 15 minutes after our divorce? As for me, I was only taking back what never belonged to him in the first place. 15 minutes post-divorce. He thought he was free. He thought he had finally escaped a barren wife, escaped a marriage he viewed as a stepping stone. But he didn't realize that freedom comes with a price tag. That night, I sat alone in my spacious penthouse, staring at the divorce decree on the table. I wasn't happy, nor was I sad. I just felt light. Finally, I no longer had to play the role of the enduring wife, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Men like Harrison don't just accept losing everything in a single afternoon. And true to form, the next morning, my phone rang. It was his familiar voice, though the arrogance was entirely gone. "Chloe, give me a chance. I was wrong." I stared at the screen for a few seconds and laughed. So, it's only when they lose all their power and money that they remember the word chance. His morning call made me laugh, but it wasn't a gloating laugh. It was more like a heavy sigh. I hung up, set the phone down, and suddenly, memories pulled me back to the beginning. If you don't look at the roots, you'd never understand how a formerly gentle woman like me could turn so cold in the span of 15 minutes. My name is Chloe Sterling. Outsiders always thought I was lucky to marry such a capable man and live a life of luxury. What they didn't know was that my luxury began with a massive secret. I was the only daughter of Richard Sterling, a man who built a billion-dollar real estate empire from nothing. My father despised flashy wealth. He taught me one simple rule. Asterisk. You can be rich, Chloe, but never let the money lead you by the nose. People will love you for who you are, or for what you have. One crisis will show you which is which. Asterisk. When I met Harrison Vance, I didn't tell him about my family. I just said, I worked in corporate planning, made a decent living, and had a busy schedule. Harrison at the time was a mid-level branch manager. He was charming, articulate, and knew how to make people believe in him. He constantly talked about his grand ambitions, the projects he wanted to build, the future we would forge together. I used to think a man with drive was a rare treasure. I also believed that if I offered genuine sincerity, I would receive it in return. The day Harrison proposed, it was pouring rain in New York. I vividly remember the sound of the rain battering the awning. He knelt down, his hands trembling as he held the ring, the rain mixing with the water on his face. I couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. He said something that melted my heart completely. Asterisk. I just need you, Chloe. I don't need money. I just need you to believe in me. Asterisk. I nodded. I thought a man willing to kneel in a torrential downpour couldn't possibly be a bad guy, but life has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes, the most beautiful words are used to mask the ugliest intentions. After the wedding, we lived with his mother, Patricia Vance. On the surface, she was a smiling, refined Upper East Side woman who loved to brag to her socialite friends about her successful son and her obedient daughter-in-law. But the moment the doors closed, her hypercritical nature bled into everything. I still remember the times she would look me up and down and drop a casual, devastating remark. Asterisk. A woman in this family needs to produce an heir. What use are you if you can't even give me a grandson? Asterisk. At first, I thought she was just being blunt, overly anxious about the family line. I held my tongue. I tried to see the good in her. I even blamed myself, feeling guilty that months into the marriage, I still wasn't pregnant. For the first 3 years, I struggled with infertility. I went through grueling IVF treatments, took medications, altered my entire diet, and attended every clinic appointment. On evenings after work, I'd walk into the house exhausted to my bones, hoping someone would just ask, "Are you tired?" Instead, I was met with Patricia's judgmental clicking tongue and Harrison's deafening silence. I don't know exactly when Harrison started changing. I only noticed he left earlier, came home later, and always kept his phone face down. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd step out onto the balcony, whispering into the receiver. When I asked, he'd brush it off. "Just work stuff, Chloe. Don't overthink it." His voice didn't have that softness from the day he proposed. He sounded like a boss dismissing an intern. I looked at him so many times, wanting to demand answers, wanting to cry, but I swallowed it down. I convinced myself that men under immense corporate pressure were naturally a bit irritable at home. Because I trusted him, I gradually handed him more control over the company. It started with him signing minor documents on my behalf, then acting as the frontman for major developments because the older investors prefer dealing with a male CEO. Harrison was very persuasive. "You're my wife. You can stay behind the scenes. Everything I do is for our future." I listened. I nodded. I was even proud of my husband's competence. Little did I know, I was handing the keys to the castle to a man who was already eyeing the throne. Once, looking over a project report in my home office, I was startled to see Harrison's name listed as the primary on several critical contracts, while my name was marginalized. When I asked, he just laughed. "What does it matter whose name is on it, as long as the money comes in?" I didn't want to argue. I thought, as long as the company is stable and our family is stable, it's fine. But the more I compromised, the further I was pushed to the edge. Then, my father passed away. The news felt like falling into a dark abyss. My father was the person I respected most, the one who truly understood me. At the funeral, Harrison stood beside me in a sharp black suit. Everyone thought he was my rock, but only I knew that while his hand rested on my shoulder, his mind was completely elsewhere. He was busy taking calls, schmoozing with VIPs, making sure to shake hands with the major shareholders. He never once looked into my swollen, red eyes. After the funeral, my father's personal attorney called me into his office to read the will. My father had laid out a very specific clause. Asterisk. Absolute control of Sterling Holdings would revert fully to me when I turned 35. Asterisk. I sat in silence for a long time. I understood. My father wasn't testing anyone. He was protecting me and his life's work. I kept this a secret. I didn't tell Harrison, not because I saw him as an outsider, but because I wanted to observe him a little longer. I still desperately wanted to believe he would shoulder the burden with me, rather than just waiting for his chance to step on me. But after the funeral, Harrison's transformation was glaring. He loved the adulation. He loved walking into rooms and hearing people call him Mr. Vance, boss. He thrived on the sycophancy. Once, I gently suggested he be more careful with a new acquisition. He looked at me and said something that sent a chill down my spine. Asterisk. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't amount to anything. Asterisk. He said it as if he had completely forgotten who actually owned the foundation he was standing on. I wanted to snap back, but I stayed quiet. I told myself, asterisk. Let him have his ego for now. I'll deal with it later. Asterisk. I didn't realize my silence was feeding his greed, making it grow by the day. When someone sees you constantly yielding, they assume it's your nature. When someone sees you step back, they think you're weak. And then came the day I accidentally saw a text flash across Harrison's phone screen. It was just a few words, but it jolted me entirely awake. Asterisk, I'm pregnant. You need to handle this. Asterisk. The sender was Mia Lawson. I didn't scream. I just felt a string snap inside my head. All those years of blaming myself, swallowing my pride around his mother, choking back tears during IVF treatments, it was all a massive, fake play while they waited to turn the page. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time that night, listening to the ticking clock, asking myself, asterisk, how much longer was I planning to play the fool? Asterisk. From that moment on, the docile part of me died. What remained was a hyper-rational, wide-awake woman. And a wide-awake woman never loses in a game of legal paperwork. That text message stayed lodged in my brain like a thorn. Asterisk. I'm pregnant. You need to handle this. Asterisk. I read it over and over, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I couldn't believe it appeared on my husband's phone exactly when I was torturing myself with hormone injections, hope, and despair. That night, I didn't make a scene. I quietly placed the phone back where it was, walked into the bathroom, and turned the faucet on full blast to drown out the sound of my own heavy breathing. I looked in the mirror at my pale face, my dark circles from insomnia, and suddenly wondered, asterisk, am I fighting for a family or just a hollow shell? Asterisk. The next morning, I confronted Harrison. I didn't beat around the bush or use an accusatory tone. I asked him, as if confirming a basic fact. What is that text from Mia about? Harrison was buttoning his shirt. At the mention of her name, he froze for exactly 1 beat, but then recovered with terrifying ease. He smirked. Stop being paranoid. It's just corporate issues. I looked at him and asked slowly, a corporate issue that says she's pregnant? Visibly annoyed. Harrison yanked at his tie and snapped. If you have so much free time, go back to your fertility clinic. Stop clinging to ridiculous fantasies. Asterisk. Go back to your fertility clinic. Asterisk. The phrase was a knife to the gut. It wasn't just an evasion. It was pure contempt. I stood perfectly still. I understood then that when a man weaponizes your deepest vulnerability to shut you up, the marriage is no longer a sanctuary. A week later, I saw the truth with my own eyes. I had a follow-up appointment at the clinic. I went earlier than planned, intending to buy some supplements for Patricia to avoid her nagging. As soon as I walked into the lobby of the private clinic, I saw a scene that cemented my feet to the marble floor. Harrison was at the registration desk. Beside him was Mia. She was wearing a loose maternity dress, her hand resting on her stomach in that practiced, protective way. Harrison was leaning in, speaking softly to her, his voice like velvet. I hadn't heard him use that voice with me in years. I stood behind a decorative pillar, neither stepping forward nor running away. I clearly heard the nurse ask, "Is this a routine prenatal checkup or your first visit?" Mia answered softly, "Routine. Week 8. Harrison nodded and added, "If you feel tired, just tell me. Don't push yourself." Hearing that, something inside my chest collapsed, not out of jealousy, but out of humiliation. Humiliation for all the times I was dead on my feet, telling him I couldn't breathe because of the IVF meds, only for him to brush it off with, "Stop being so dramatic, Chloe." I went home that night and said nothing. I needed absolute certainty. I refused to be the paranoid wife who makes wild guesses and turns herself into a laughingstock. I quietly hired a private investigator, 1 phone call, a hefty wire transfer, and days later, I received a thick dossier and a summary report that made my blood run cold. They had been seeing each other for over 6 months. 6 months, meaning while I was still going to doctors, still trying, still hoping. The dossier also contained a detail that woke me up entirely. Mia wasn't just a marketing associate. She had been Harrison's personal assistant. She traveled with him to meet clients, managed his calendar, and knew every gap in his schedule that I didn't. Reading that, everything clicked. Why his phone was always face down, why he took calls on the balcony, why his business trips were so suspiciously rhythmic. It wasn't work. It was a well-oiled routine of betrayal. But the most painful blow wasn't the affair. The PI included bank records. Harrison had wired money from a corporate account, masking it as a vendor consulting fee, to purchase a luxury condo under the name of Mia's relative. I read the transaction line over and over and suddenly burst out laughing. I laughed because I realized he wasn't just defrauding my heart. He was treating my father's legacy, our conglomerate, like his personal piggy bank. I didn't wait. I called Harrison into the living room, slammed the photos and the financial records on the coffee table, and said exactly 1 sentence. "Explain this." Harrison glanced at the papers, leaned back into the sofa, and looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try to deny it for long. He simply exhaled, looked at me with dead eyes, and said, "Yeah, so what?" My throat tightened. I thought I would scream, smash things, but I didn't. I just asked, my voice hoarse, "Why would you do this?" He looked at me as if I were a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. Then he delivered the line that tore my pride to shreds. "I need someone to give me a child. Can you do that? Then don't ask." My entire body went numb. I realized that in Harrison's eyes, I wasn't a wife. I was a failed contract. And since the contract failed, he immediately sought a new vendor. As if that wasn't cruel enough, his mother, Patricia, showed me what it truly means to enable a monster. When she found out, she didn't reprimand her son. She tilted her chin up at me, her voice dripping with shameless entitlement. "It's normal for successful men to have children outside the home. As long as he comes back here, you should be fine with it." I stared at her, my heart turning to ice. So, all those years of berating me for not getting pregnant weren't because she cared about her son's happiness. She only cared about her family's prestige, the heir to her bloodline. I was nothing but an incubator. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I didn't cry. I pieced everything together and realized a terrifying truth. They were using me as a bridge for Harrison to climb the corporate ladder, a bridge for Patricia to flaunt her status to her Upper East Side friends, a bridge to exploit the Sterling Holdings empire. Now that the bridge was no longer convenient, they were ready to detonate it, and just as I predicted, Harrison started pushing for a divorce. But he wasn't in a rush to finalize it. He had a condition first. One evening, he casually tossed a stack of documents in front of me, his voice commanding, like he was ordering takeout. "Sign the transfer of your controlling voting rights to me. Then, we divorce." I looked at the paperwork, feeling like I was staring at his greed manifested in ink. I asked, "What else do you want?" He smirked. "I want things neat and tidy. Sign it to save us both a headache." I understood. Asterisk. This times was the real goal. Mia was just the catalyst. What he truly hungered for was absolute power and my assets. I didn't sign that night. I didn't argue. I just quietly went to my room and called attorney Harvey Klein, my late father's personal lawyer. He was the one who had once advised me. Asterisk. When in doubt, Chloe, don't interrogate the guilty. Interrogate the paperwork. Asterisk. I met him the next morning. In the quiet, mahogany-lined office, Harvey opened the files and pointed out every line, every clause. That was the moment a painful, yet sobering truth washed over me. I still owned exactly 51% of the shares. Harrison was merely the acting proxy. He only had the authority to sign times because I allowed it asterisk. In other words, he thought he was the king, but he was only ruling in my shadow. I walked out of the law firm feeling completely different. Not happy, but times clear asterisk. Clear that if I showed an ounce of weakness now, I would lose everything. And from that second on, I began plotting my strategy. Not an emotional revenge scheme, but a methodical plan to end them legally, strictly by the book, making them pay the exact price they had authored. From the day I left Harvey's office, I stopped asking times why asterisk. I started asking times how asterisk. Knowing exactly the cards I held, I didn't need to rush, and I absolutely couldn't let emotion take the wheel. I went to the office as usual, came home on time, and responded to Patricia with just the right amount of polite detachment. But internally, I had built an iron fortress. They saw my silence and mistook it for surrender. In reality, I was calculating every step to make the execution clean, swift, and legally airtight. Harrison grew impatient. Perhaps because I wasn't screaming and clinging to him like he had fantasized. One night, he came home late, tossed a divorce petition onto the dining table, and spoke as if reading a dry receipt. "We're not compatible. Let's divorce." Patricia was peeling an apple on the sofa. She perked up instantly, her eyes gleaming. She dropped a sugary but venomous comment. Yes, free each other. This girl is practically useless around the house anyway. I looked at the petition. I didn't ask questions. I didn't perform a tragic monologue. I got straight to the point. What are your terms? Harrison smirked, thinking I was terrified, and laid out his demands like a corporate buyout. I retain my position as CEO. All corporate assets I currently use, the penthouses, the fleet cars remain in my possession. You just sign, so we can keep this peaceful. He even tried to sound magnanimous. After all, I don't want you to walk away with nothing. I almost laughed out loud. He didn't want me to walk away with nothing, or he didn't want me to wake up in time. I looked at him, and only one thought crossed my mind. Asterisk. When a greedy man sits in a high chair long enough, he forgets who owns the chair. Asterisk. I gave a slight nod, feigning exhaustion. I just want peace. If we can divorce quietly, I'll sign. Both Harrison and Patricia paused for a second, then exchanged a look of barely concealed glee. Harrison scoffed. Exactly. Don't make a scene. I would sign. All right. But not the papers he gave me. I would sign their termination, in a way they never saw coming. That very night, I texted Harvey. Asterisk. Prepare the documents to revoke all proxy and acting CEO rights. I'll let him think he's won right up until the final second. Asterisk. Harvey replied simply, asterisk. Stay calm, Chloe. I have the paperwork ready. Asterisk. Reading that text, I felt strange. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was the icy, absolute calm of someone backed into a corner who has just found the exit. In the days that followed, Harrison played his role to the hilt. He spoke to me like a merciful lord. I'll let you keep the small downtown condo so you can survive. Don't be greedy. I stayed quiet. Patricia chimed in with her humiliating suburban elite wisdom. A woman with no children has nobody to care for her in old age. Just accept your fate, and don't make it difficult for my son. I stayed quiet so they would remain confident. The more confident they were, the sloppier they got. A week before our court date, Sterling Holdings had its quarterly board of directors meeting. Harrison strutted into the boardroom, soaking in the "Good morning, Mr. Vance greetings." He took the chairman's seat out of habit, glancing at me with a half smile, a silent reminder to know my place. I kept my face blank. I was focused on one thing: the digital corporate signatures and the master approval system matrix. That was the real lock to the vault. Not his empty words. During the meeting, I didn't argue over trivialities. I simply requested to add a minor agenda item. I'd like to initiate a routine security audit of our digital signatures and system access protocols. Just a standard compliance update. Harrison immediately waved it off. Minor IT issue. Let them handle it. I nodded. Of course. Minor issue. But a minor issue left unchecked becomes a fatal flaw. A few shareholders glanced at me, but Harrison just smirked, thinking I was trying to sound relevant. As soon as the meeting ended, I walked straight to the IT department with the Chief Information Officer. I ordered an immediate rerouting of administrative privileges according to the corporate bylaws. Asterisk. All master digital signatures and high-level transaction approvals must route exclusively to the chairwoman of the board. Asterisk. I didn't raise my voice. I just placed the corporate charter in front of them. The CIO nodded and executed the command. Harrison had no idea. He was down in the parking garage, too busy taking a call from Mia, laughing as if our impending divorce was a victory lap. I kept everything under wraps until the final moment. I didn't brag. The fewer people who knew, the safer I was. I only confided in one person, Tyler Stone, the head of internal control. Watch him closely, I told Tyler. From now on, anything moving in or out of Harrison's office needs a digital footprint. Tyler looked at me and said, "Don't worry, boss. I despise guys who bite the hand that feeds them." On the day of the divorce, it wasn't raining, but the air was biting. like a cold draft blowing straight through my chest. I wore a simple, tailored suit, my hair pulled back. Harrison, on the other hand, was dressed to the nines. He showed up with Patricia and was holding hands with Mia right in the courthouse hallway. She stood pressed against him, perfectly made up, her hand dramatically resting on her stomach like an exclamation point aimed directly at my eyes. When Harrison saw me, he smiled, speaking loud enough for the passing attorneys to hear. "You're early. Afraid you'd miss out?" Mia chimed in, playing the gentle angel. "Please don't be mad, Chloe. I just came to support him." I looked at them without offering a single excess word. I just delivered a basic, everyday phrase that somehow makes people extremely uncomfortable. "You two are perfect for each other. Congratulations," Harrison faltered, probably because I didn't fly into a hysterical rage like he anticipated. His smile grew strained. "Once we sign, I am a free man." Inside the chambers, the judge verified the paperwork. I heard every word clearly, but my mind was utterly tranquil. When the decree was placed in front of me, I didn't hesitate. My pen glided smoothly. Decisive, Harrison stared at me, slightly stunned, as if looking at a stranger. He signed immediately after, leaning back in his chair like a massive weight had been lifted. Walking out of the chambers, Harrison threw his arm around Mia, triumphant. "Done. Time to turn the page." I didn't argue. I just replied, using his own words but carrying a totally different meaning. "Yes, you are free." He didn't realize that freedom had a price, and the billing cycle started that very day. I said nothing more. I quietly took out my phone and dialed the numbers I had lined up. While Harrison was still basking in his perceived victory, across the city, the corporate mainframe was slamming shut the doors he thought would remain open for a lifetime. I made those calls the second I stepped off the courthouse stairs. But I didn't call Harrison, and I certainly didn't call his mother to scream. I called the people who needed to hear it, the ones with the power to execute protocol, because men like Harrison only fear one thing: paper trails and corporate systems. Screaming and crying would only give him the satisfaction of playing the victim. Before I could even leave the courthouse plaza, I saw Harrison with his arm around Mia, laughing like they were celebrating. They weren't in a hurry. They walked slowly, making sure I could see them. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my files, feeling an alien sense of peace. Harrison glanced my way and smirked. "See that? This is what a real Times family looks like." He projected his voice, wanting the pedestrians to hear, wanting to humiliate me. Mia didn't miss her cue. She gave me a condescending once-over and delivered a stinging line. "If you can't keep your man, you only have yourself to blame." I absorbed every word, feeling a layer of ice settle over me. Not the ice of despair, but the ice of absolute clarity. I realized what they really wanted. They didn't just want a divorce. They wanted my destruction. They wanted me to break down, cry, and scream so they could have both the assets and the moral high ground. I gave them nothing. I looked dead into Harrison's eyes and said flatly, "Take her wherever you want. Just get out of my way." I turned on my heel. My voice didn't shake. I was resolute. But before I got far, I saw them turn the corner into a prestigious private clinic a few blocks away. I knew this hospital. Years ago, I brought Patricia here for her specialists. I spent countless hours in those waiting rooms waiting on my IVF results. And today, the man who used to hold my hand while we waited for lab results was holding another woman's hand, taking her to a prenatal visit. The irony was so thick that if this were a movie, critics would say the writing was too heavy-handed. But reality doesn't require logic. It only requires brutal timing. I stood in the clinic lobby, a few yards behind them. Harrison marched to the desk, his voice booming like he had just conquered a nation. "My wife is 8 weeks pregnant. I need the VIP suite." The receptionist nodded and asked for the paperwork. Mia leaned on Harrison's shoulder, cradling her belly, moaning softly, as if terrified the world might not realize she was with child. Harrison signed the intake forms, beaming, and turned to her. Don't worry, baby. I've got everything taken care of. Asterisk. I've got everything taken care of. Asterisk. I had heard that exact phrase before, in a very different context. The day my father died, I sat on the floor, trembling. Harrison had said, asterisk, I've got everything taken care of. Asterisk. But his version of taking care of it meant securing his own CEO chair, shaking hands with the board, networking his way to the top. Meanwhile, the woman at home, enduring his mother, enduring the IVF, enduring the crushing loneliness, was completely excluded from that promise. I didn't step closer. I pulled out my phone and dialed Megan Thorne in corporate finance. My voice was chillingly calm. Megan, freeze all corporate auxiliary cards under Harrison Vance. Do it right now. Megan didn't ask questions. Yes, Chloe. It'll be done in 3 minutes. I hung up and dialed David Quinn in legal. Activate the clause terminating proxy representation. Revoke his digital signatures and lock his access to the master approval matrix. Issue the termination memo today, David replied crisply. Drafting the internal memo and locking him out of the mainframe now. I made the final call to corporate administration. Revoke his fleet vehicles and his access to the executive penthouses. Today, send the official notice to the building management and the parking garages. The admin hesitated for a second. Are you confirming this, Miss Sterling? Confirmed. I take full responsibility. I put my phone back in my purse and stood still for a few seconds. Not out of hesitation, but to brand this moment into my memory. The moment the man who treated me like discarded trash was drunkenly celebrating a victory he hadn't won. I wanted to remember it. Not to harbor hate, but as a reminder to stay sharp should my resolve ever waver. Right as Harrison was bending down to sign the final VIP room waiver, his phone rang. He answered it, frowning. Hello? What do you mean the card was declined? He whipped out his wallet, pulled another corporate Amex, and handed it to the cashier. Swipe this one. The machine beeped. Asterisk. Declined. Asterisk. Harrison started getting agitated. He barked at the cashier. Run it again. I just used this card yesterday. The cashier looked apologetic. Sir, the system says the auxiliary account has been locked. The words times auxiliary account times slapped him across the face. He stood frozen for a second. Then his eyes darted around the lobby like a cornered animal sensing a trap. His gaze locked onto me. He marched toward me, his voice a low, vicious growl. What the hell are you playing at? I looked at him, utterly unbothered. I spoke slowly, letting each word land. The tricks of the owner. Harrison's eyes bulged. Are you insane? You think you have the authority? I cut him off, not raising my voice but making it razor sharp. You are the one who's mistaken. What gave you the right to think you could treat company assets like your personal piggy bank? Mia stood behind him, her face ashen, but she tried to keep up her act. She whimpered, Harrison, I'm feeling sick. Then she looked at me, her voice trembling but still trying to shift the blame. If you do this, what if something happens to the baby? I didn't look at her for long. I just delivered a cold dose of reality. Your baby is between you and him. The money is between him and the company. I turned to leave, refusing to engage further. But before Harrison could chase after me, his phone rang again. This time, it was HR. I faintly heard him yelling into the receiver, What termination? Then, the voice on the other end, firm and official, asterisk, Mr. Vance, the board resolution terminating your position as CEO has been signed and is effective as of this afternoon. Asterisk. Harrison's face morphed in real time. I watched the signature arrogance slide right off his face like a mask being ripped away. For the first time in his life, I saw genuine fear, not the fake kind. Asterisk. Real fear. Asterisk, he stammered. Impossible. Who signed it? Standing a step away, I gave him the answer. The board of directors. And I was the one who motioned for it. Harrison looked like he was being choked. He turned to Mia, his eyes bloodshot, and in her panic, she inadvertently blurted out the same words she had used earlier. Asterisk. But you said you had everything taken care of. Asterisk. Her voice echoed across the upscale lobby. People were starting to stare. Harrison panicked and yanked her arm. Shut up! Watching them, I felt no triumphant glee. I only saw a cold, hard truth. Asterisk. When someone loves you for the benefits, the love vanishes the moment the benefits do. Asterisk. I walked out of the clinic. The New York wind hit my face, biting cold, but the chill in my heart was deeper. Harrison and Mia were still arguing in the lobby behind me. I didn't look back. I knew that the moment I revoked his cards, his cars, his penthouses, and his corporate power, the game had fundamentally changed. This was no longer a story about a cheating husband and a scorned wife. This was a war against greed whose supply line had just been severed. I barely had the engine of my car started when my phone vibrated. It was Harvey Klein. His voice was urgent, cutting straight to the chase. Chloe, Harrison is making a desperate move. His lawyers just filed an emergency petition to freeze your assets, claiming you're dissipating marital property and abusing your authority. I laughed out loud. Not a happy laugh, but a laugh at how predictable the playbook was. Dissipating what? The assets belong to Sterling Holdings. I merely revoked his proxy usage. He wants to turn corporate property into his personal divorce settlement, and he's claiming I'm times out of line? Harvey sounded tense. They're trying to wage a PR war. If they drag you into a public investigation, they can spin the narrative. Vindictive heiress abuses power. They want to force you to the negotiating table. I watched the Manhattan traffic ahead of me, suddenly seeing Harrison's true colors clearer than ever. When he had power, he played the civilized gentleman. The second he lost it, he resorted to playing dirty. I spoke into the phone, my voice steady. Follow the standard legal procedures, Harvey. I'll handle the legal fallout. I am not settling. If I yield an inch, I lose the whole board. Understood, Harvey warned. Head straight to corporate headquarters. Do not go to your private residence. They might try to set up an ambush with cameras to provoke you. Got it, I said, and hung up. I pulled the car into traffic, heading straight for the Sterling Holdings skyscraper. My mind was singularly focused. Lock the doors, barricade the vulnerabilities, and scrub the digital trails before they could sabotage the company. I strode into the lobby. The staff looked at me with a mix of fear and intense curiosity. I didn't stop to explain. I just gave a curt nod, took the private elevator to the executive floor, and summoned the three people I trusted most. Megan Thorne arrived first, her face tight. David Quinn followed, clutching his laptop and the corporate charter. Tyler Stone walked in last, his suit slightly rumpled from rushing up from the security hub. I closed the boardroom doors, took a seat, and got straight to it. The situation has devolved into a dirty war. We need to be surgical, Megan asked immediately. What are they planning? I took a sip of water and said something that sounded cold even to me. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm just taking out the trash. And trash left out too long starts to stink. Tyler tossed a flash drive onto the conference table, his voice grim. Boss, I need to report this now. Since last night, Harrison had his team clone the data for the upcoming development projects. It's highly likely he kept hard copies to use as leverage or for extortion. I stared at the USB drive, a mix of fury and intense clarity rising in my chest. So, he hadn't just prepped a fake pregnancy narrative, he had prepped his golden parachute by stealing proprietary data. David gritted his teeth. If he leaks those contracts, our partners will panic and the shareholders will riot. This isn't a messy divorce anymore. This is corporate sabotage. I tapped my fingernails against the mahogany table, issuing orders without hesitation. 1. Initiate a hard reset on all system passwords. Priority on the project databases and the approval matrix. 2. Revoke all of Harrison's digital signatures and VPN access, including any ghost accounts he might have set up. 3. Draft a protocol to audit his office today. I want witnesses. I want internal security cameras rolling, and I want the room sealed. Megan nodded rapidly. I'm locking down the cash flow and credit limits right now, David replied. I'll draft the internal memo citing the specific bylaws. We do everything by the book so no one can challenge it, Tyler said simply. I've got the crime scene and the evidence. Just as I finished speaking, my phone rang again. The caller ID made me smirk. Patricia Vance. I answered it. I didn't even need to guess what she was going to say. Sure enough. Her shrill, venomous voice blasted through the speaker. You think you've won doing this? Let me tell you something, you little bitch. I am going to make sure you never show your face in this city again. I listened, letting out a soft exhale. I had no desire to argue. Arguing with someone whose currency is screaming matches is a waste of time, I replied, keeping my voice low and lethal. Try it, Patricia. But remember, talk less, scheme more. Otherwise, you'll just exhaust yourself, she shrieked, preparing to launch into another tirade, but I hung up. No debate. No explanations. I owed that woman absolutely nothing, not even basic courtesy. I turned to David, instructing him as if discussing a mundane itinerary. From now on, record every threatening call, screenshot every smear campaign post, archive everything, build the file, but do not react emotionally. David nodded. Understood. Let them dig their own graves. Less than 5 minutes later, Tyler received a text from a contact in the PR department. Mia Lawson was live streaming. I opened the app on my phone and watched the screen, almost wanting to laugh. She was standing in a hospital corridor, her makeup perfectly smudged, clutching her belly, sobbing into the camera, playing the ultimate victim. Asterisk. My husband's ex-wife went crazy with jealousy and stole all our assets. I'm pregnant. She's so evil. Asterisk. Below the video, hundreds of comments were rolling in. Some were cursing me, some were pitying her, and some were just there for the drama. That is the terrifying power of social media. Anyone can play judge and jury based on a 30-second clip. Megan looked at me, panicked. Chloe, should we release a statement immediately? I shook my head, speaking slowly. No. Let them perform. The more they act, the more mistakes they'll make, David agreed. The more she talks, the higher the chance she contradicts herself. We just wait for the slip-up. I nodded. In that moment, there was no room in my heart for self-pity. I only had one thought. Asterisk. To win this game, you have to be able to endure the noise. Asterisk. Harvey called back, his tone even more serious. Chloe, Harrison just booked a meeting with a tabloid journalist for tonight. They're likely going to drop a massive hit piece to force you to settle. You need to be careful. I wasn't surprised. I just said, don't worry, Harvey. I'm not settling. Have the counter-statements ready, along with the corporate ledgers proving the assets belong to the holdings. I want our ammunition loaded before they even fire. You're making the right call, Harvey said. Don't let them drag you into the mud. I hung up and looked at the 3 people sitting in front of me. I closed the meeting with a statement meant to reassure them, but also to anchor myself. From this second forward, treat this as a corporate crisis management operation, not a divorce. Tyler stood up first, his eyes hardened. You can trust us, boss. Anyone tries to play dirty with you, I'll drag them out into the light. Megan took a deep breath. I'm locking the vault, David nodded. I'm locking the legal loopholes. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the HVAC. Outside, they were plotting to paint me as the villain. But inside this room, I knew exactly what I was doing. I didn't need anyone's pity. I just needed to be legally right. And when you let the law and the system do the work, the ones playing dirty eventually slip on their own mess. No sooner had I thought times they'll slip on their own mess times than my phone buzzed again. It was as if someone were deliberately plucking my nerves like guitar strings. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I answered. A man's raspy, faux polite voice came through. Is this Chloe Sterling? I'm an investigative reporter for a digital financial outlet. Someone sent me a video of you assaulting a pregnant woman at a clinic. Care to comment? I wasn't shocked. I just found it amusing that such an archaic extortion tactic was still in use. I kept my voice perfectly level. Which video? He cleared his throat. The one where you're screaming and threatening a pregnant woman. The internet is pretty outraged. Miss Sterling. I let out a soft breath. I knew exactly what they had done. They took the footage of me standing there, muted it, dubbed over aggressive audio, slapped on a clickbait headline, and tried to frame me as a monster. I spoke directly, neither begging nor pleading. Publish it if you want, but make sure you also publish the raw, unedited security footage I'm about to send you. Because if you knowingly publish a doctored video, my legal team will sue your outlet into the ground. The line went dead quiet for a beat. When he spoke again, his tone was much softer. Please, Miss Sterling, calm down. We just want both sides of the story. I cut him off sharply. I am perfectly calm. Give me your email address. I'm sending you the raw footage right now. I hung up and turned to Tyler. Tyler didn't need to be told twice. He flipped open his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He called a contact at the clinic's security desk and requested the lobby camera feeds. Watching Tyler work, I realized that in moments of chaos, the most valuable asset isn't a promise. It's someone who knows how to execute. In under an hour, Tyler placed the full, unedited video file in front of me. It showed me standing still, making phone calls. No charging forward, no screaming, no assault. The viral clip had been heavily doctored with fake audio to incite outrage. Tyler also handed me a piece of intel that made me narrow my eyes. Boss. I traced the original IP of the upload. It belongs to a burner account tied to a guy named Kevin Nash. He used to be an administrative assistant under Harrison. He resigned 3 months ago. I nodded, fitting another puzzle piece into place. They wanted to destroy me in the court of public opinion first. Because public outrage is cheap but highly destructive. If they ruined my reputation, my legitimate actions taking back the cars, the apartments, the CEO title would be spun as the hysterical revenge of a bitter ex-wife. If I panicked, I would make a mistake. If I made a mistake, they won. But before they could pop the champagne, Megan burst into the room, her face pale. She slammed a stack of bank statements on the table, speaking rapidly. Chloe, look at this. 3 massive wire transfers from corporate accounts to a newly incorporated LLC, authorized by Harrison's digital signature. They went out last week. I looked at the numbers. Then, at the dates. Asterisk. Last week, asterisk. That was when he was still playing the normal husband, still pressuring me to sign over my voting rights to keep things tidy. A cold chill ran down my spine. The divorce wasn't a sudden impulse. It was the final step in a premeditated scheme to launder company money. He was waiting for me to sign away my rights, so I would be left holding the bag for his embezzlement. I didn't pound the table. I didn't curse. I issued orders like a general reviewing a battlefield map. Megan, freeze all outgoing transactions above the daily threshold immediately. Draft a forensic accounting report. By tonight, I want to know exactly where that money went, who the beneficiary is, and if there are actual vendor contracts to back it up. Megan nodded sharply. On it. I turned to David. Prepare the internal compliance dossier. Leave a paper trail for everything. Pull the IP logs and timestamps for his digital signature usage, David replied confidently. Understood. Just then, a commotion erupted in the main lobby downstairs. A frantic receptionist ran upstairs. Miss Sterling! Harrison is here! I stood up slowly, smoothing out my blazer. I knew this scene was inevitable. The man who had just lost his throne was going to try and reclaim it by causing a scene. I walked out to the atrium balcony and looked down through the glass railing. Harrison was standing in the center of the lobby, acting like he still owned the building. He had brought Mia and Patricia with him. Patricia's face was set in a furious scowl, her hands on her hips, ready for war. Mia was clutching her stomach, her eyes red, playing the fragile victim. Harrison scanned the terrified employees and yelled, ensuring his voice carried to the rafters. "I am still the CEO of this company. She is just a washed-up legacy kid, riding her daddy's coattails." Several employees looked down at their shoes, too afraid to speak. Others glanced up at me with worried eyes. I walked down the grand staircase, stopping a calculated distance away from him. My voice was crisp and authoritative. "Harrison, you were terminated at exactly 2:12 p.m. The company-wide memo has already been circulated. Causing a scene here only makes things worse for you." Harrison laughed, a desperate attempt to maintain dominance. "You think a piece of paper stops me? You don't know the law, Chloe." I didn't miss a beat. "I don't need to explain myself to you. I know the law perfectly well, which is exactly why I'm standing here." Mia immediately flipped the switch to tears. "Are you trying to drive us to suicide, Chloe? I'm carrying a child. Aren't you afraid of karma?" I looked at her, delivering a line that was icy but devoid of vulgarity. "No one drove you anywhere, Mia. You walked into this trap yourself. Now you can sit in it." She froze, clearly not expecting me to refuse to engage in her melodrama. Patricia, seeing the momentum stall, lunged forward. Her voice was a screeching siren. "If you don't give back the penthouses and the cars, I swear to God I will ruin your reputation. I will tell the whole city what you are. I'll humiliate you." I didn't flinch. I didn't engage in a screaming match. I just stated a fact. "My reputation doesn't live in your mouth, Patricia. It lives in legal documents." The truth of that statement choked her. Harrison turned slightly paler. He knew I was targeting his exact vulnerability. He took half a step closer, dropping his voice to a threatening hiss. "Chloe, don't push me. If I go crazy, I'll take you down with me." I stared directly into his eyes, my voice soft but lethal. "Go ahead. But remember, the crazier you get, the more you reveal." Harrison ground his teeth, his fists clenched as if he wanted to smash the lobby to pieces. Right at that moment, Tyler leaned in and whispered rapidly in my ear. "Boss, they brought guys, look like fixers hired to film this." I glanced toward the revolving doors. Two men in unmarked jackets were standing at an angle, phones raised, actively recording, trying to find the best angle. I instantly understood the play. They wanted me to lose my temper. They wanted a physical altercation. A shove, a shouted curse anything to secure footage of the vindictive chairwoman attacking a pregnant woman. 1 second of lost control, and they'd have ammunition to smear me forever. I took a slow, deep breath, murmuring to Tyler so only he could hear. "Don't touch them. Have building security escort them out according to standard trespassing protocols." Then I turned back to Harrison, my tone deadpan. "If you want to resolve this, we use lawyers and documents. If you're just here to put on a show, I'm sorry. I don't have the time to be your co-star." The lobby air felt thick. Harrison stood there, his fake-sick mistress on one side, his screaming mother on the other, his hired cameras waiting in the wings. And I stood perfectly still. I knew that if I stood there long enough, they would eventually expose their true nature to the entire room. I held my ground, staring him down, while his eyes darted around, calculating which act to perform next. The crowd of employees was swelling. Some held their breath. Others pretended to read files while watching the spectacle. I knew what Harrison wanted. He needed a spark, a harsh word, a shove, anything to paint me as unhinged. And I knew that with a crowd watching, this was the perfect moment to dismantle his trap publicly. Suddenly, Harrison lunged toward the reception desk, where a tray of water glasses and a decorative vase sat. He deliberately swung his elbow. A glass shattered violently against the marble floor, splashing water everywhere. He immediately pointed a finger at me, screaming as if he had just been assaulted. "See? Look at her! She stripped me of my dignity, and now she treats me like a dog." A few people jumped. The two men at the door instantly raised their phones higher, zooming in on me. Mia snapped into action, pulling out her own phone, shoving it toward my face while sobbing hysterically. "Help! Everyone look! I'm pregnant, and she's trying to ruin our lives!" Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were gleaming with the thrill of the trap. I didn't step forward. I didn't flinch. I just turned slightly to Tyler and gave a single nod. Tyler didn't hesitate. He marched straight to the IT control podium at the reception desk and snapped an order at the AV tech. Seconds later, the massive LED presentation screen spanning the lobby wall flared to life. People gasped, assuming it was a corporate promo video. But it wasn't. It was the live feed from the lobby's high-definition security cameras. Tyler rewound it by 60 seconds. The footage played back, crystal clear. It showed Harrison deliberately swinging his elbow into the glass, knocking it over himself. Before turning to point and scream, it showed Mia pulling out her phone and framing the shot times before times anything had even happened, actively adjusting her angle to make sure I was in the center of the frame. It was a perfectly choreographed, undeniably fake setup, exposed in 4K resolution. The entire lobby went dead silent. Then, someone let out a small, sharp laugh. They literally staged it. The whisper rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Harrison's face went white. He lunged toward the AV desk, screaming, "Turn that off! Who gave you authorization to play that?" He tried to grab the control panel, but Tyler stepped in front of him, built like a brick wall. "Back off, Harrison," Tyler said, his voice a low rumble. "This is private property. Security footage is reviewed at the discretion of building management." I took one step forward, ensuring my voice carried over the murmurs. "You can try to play me for a fool in private, but trying to play a room full of hundreds of professionals? Do you think they're stupid?" A few employees actually chuckled a tense, vindicated laugh at the sheer audacity of it. Harrison froze, his lips twitching. He hadn't expected me to flip the script and humiliate him using the building's own infrastructure. Patricia, seeing the tide turn catastrophically, lost what little restraint she had. She lunged at me, raising her hand to slap me or grab my phone. Tyler stepped between us instantly. "Ma'am, keep your hands to yourself. You are on camera, and we are logging an incident report," she shrieked. "Get out of my way! I'm going to teach this bitch a lesson!" Tyler didn't budge an inch. "You can teach whoever you want in your own home. You are currently in a corporate lobby." I barely looked at her. I turned to the head of building security and issued a crisp directive. "Call the NYPD precinct. Have them dispatch officers to file a report for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and unauthorized corporate espionage via recording devices." The security chief nodded and keyed his radio. "I don't need a shouting match," I added, loud enough for Harrison to hear. "A police report is more than enough to handle people who don't know how to behave." Realizing his strategy was collapsing, Harrison pivoted with whiplash-inducing speed. He dropped his voice, trying to look broken, playing the tragic ex-husband card. "Chloe, I made a mistake, but you can't strip me of everything like this. I still have a reputation. I need a way to survive." He said it loudly enough for the crowd to hear, still hoping to salvage some sympathy. Mia swapped tactics too, whimpering. "Please, Chloe, have mercy on us." I smiled faintly. Not a gloating smile, but the smile of someone who saw straight to the bottom of their souls. "I didn't strip you of anything. I only took back what never belonged to you. I didn't add any insults." The more humiliated a person is, the more desperate they get, and I wasn't about to give him ammo. Just then, Megan stepped out of the elevator, clutching a thick, red file. She walked straight over to me, speaking loudly enough for David and the lingering executives to hear. "Chloe, here is the forensic report on the 3 wire transfers to the Shell LLC. We have the digital IP logs, timestamps, and the beneficiary data." I didn't open the file right away. I took it from her and turned to face Harrison. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice perfectly level, but every word sliced like a scalpel. "Did you really think I was just taking back the apartments and the cars? I took the receipts, too." Harrison stumbled back a step. the blood draining completely from his face. He opened his mouth to deny it. But before he could speak, Mia, paralyzed by fear, accidentally repeated the words she had said at the clinic. Asterisk. But you said you had everything taken care of. She realized instantly that she had just implicated him in front of the entire company. The lobby erupted in gasps. Patricia whipped around and screamed at her. Shut your mouth! But the damage was done. I didn't need to press the issue. I turned to David. File the criminal complaint for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and the use of falsified financial instruments. As of right now, Harrison Vance has zero leverage to negotiate. David nodded and pulled out his phone. Tyler kept his eyes locked on the two men with the cameras, who were now quietly trying to slip out the door. Harrison stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the disgusted and pitying stares of the people who used to call him boss. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, because when the security footage played, all his lies became irrelevant. And I knew this confrontation was merely the opening salvo, but it was enough to send a clear message. I was no longer the woman they could drag around by a leash. After the Jumbotron incident in the lobby, the atmosphere shifted drastically. Building security filed the incident report, documenting the trespassing and the staged altercation. Harrison was escorted out to the sound of hushed whispers. Patricia tried to scream a few more insults to save face, but the louder she yelled, the more pathetic she looked. I stood there, watching them get pushed out the revolving doors like a stain being wiped off glass. Once the doors shut, I turned to the staff, calmly instructed them to return to work, and went back upstairs. That afternoon, the internal corporate atmosphere stabilized. I held an emergency meeting with the department heads, emphasizing one thing: business continues as normal. Anyone who received threatening calls or texts was to report them immediately to internal control. I knew Harrison wouldn't just roll over and die. Men like him, when stripped of their power, don't retreat gracefully. They fight dirty. They try to exhaust you before you can crush them. And right on cue, that evening, as I pulled up to my private townhouse in the city, Tyler called me, his voice urgent. Boss, don't get out of the car. There's a situation at your property. My heart hammered in my chest. I rolled down the window slightly and peered down the street. The flashing lights of a squad car illuminated a small crowd of neighbors pointing at my front gate. I pulled up the security camera feed on my phone. The image made my blood run cold. My wrought iron gates were splashed with blood-red paint. Strung across the brick wall was a massive vinyl banner, printed in bold letters for the whole Upper East Side to see. Asterisk, asterisk, ruthless CEO steals, husband, destroys pregnant woman. Asterisk, asterisk. Strewn across the sidewalk were hundreds of flyers bearing my face, taken from a gala photo covered in defamatory slurs. I sat in the car, perfectly still, diagnosing the tactic. They were playing to the mob. It didn't matter if it was true. It only mattered that it was loud. If a person gets publicly smeared in their own neighborhood, the psychological toll is immense. Harrison wanted me to jump out of the car, scream, rip down the banner, and look like a maniac for the cameras he had undoubtedly hidden nearby. He wanted me to break under the pressure of my peers. I refused to give it to him. I spoke to Tyler, my voice steady. Don't send a cleanup crew yet. First, get the license plates from the street cameras. Pull the footage of whoever threw the paint and hung the banner. Document the entire scene. Tyler responded with military precision. Understood. I've already pulled the feeds from the brownstone across the street in the intersection. Good. Have the NYPD file a formal report for vandalism and harassment. I am not showing my face. Yes, ma'am. Tyler said. I knew that showing my face was exactly what they wanted. But police reports and hard evidence? That's what they feared. Before I could even catch my breath, Harvey called. His tone was grim. Chloe, Harrison just filed an injunction in family court to freeze your controlling shares. His argument is that he was instrumental in building the company and suspects you of illicitly transferring marital assets. I let out a dark, hollow laugh. It wasn't funny, but the sheer audacity was staggering. Instrumental in building times the company? He was instrumental in looting it. They're trying to back you into a corner, Chloe. If you panic, they'll leak the injunction to the Wall Street journals to force a settlement. Draft the motion to dismiss, I said sharply. I want everything filed by the book. They need proof for an injunction. I'm not scared. Just move fast. I hung up, and almost instantly, Megan sent me a secure file. It was the background check on the LLC that received the embezzled funds. Her message was brief. Asterisk Chloe. The LLC is registered to a distant cousin of Patricia Vance. It's not a third-party vendor. Asterisk. I stared at the screen. The final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. It was a family-run embezzlement ring. They had set up a proxy, planned the theft, and intended to siphon the accounts dry before finalizing the divorce. I leaned back against the leather seat of my car, staring into the dark New York night. I wasn't sad anymore. I was hyper-vigilant. When a betrayal involves a financial syndicate, they don't stop at spray paint and flyers. They escalate to extortion, threats, and blackmail. Right on cue, my phone vibrated again. An unknown number. I answered. A man's raspy, arrogant voice slithered through the speaker. You want this to go away? Meet with me. Don't let things get uglier than they have to be. I gripped the steering wheel, asking directly, Who is this? He chuckled, a nasty sound. Let's just say I have a flash drive that belongs to your ex-husband, and it's got data on it you definitely don't want leaked to the press. I stayed silent for a few seconds. I wasn't scared. I was analyzing. This was the escalation. They were moving to blackmail via stolen corporate secrets. What do you want? I asked evenly. Meet me to negotiate. Just you. I glanced at the dashboard clock and gave him a time and place. I'll be there. As soon as I hung up, Harvey called back, as if he possessed a sixth sense. Someone just called to extort me, I told him quickly. He claims to have Harrison's USB drive. Harvey panicked. Do not go alone, Chloe. It's a setup. I looked out the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass like thin blades. I'm not going alone, I said, my voice cold and deliberate. I'm bringing a trap. I immediately called Tyler, giving him the rundown. Tyler paused for a second before saying, I copy. I'll prepare the team and the surveillance protocol. Keep it strictly legal, I warned. We need a flawless chain of evidence. Witnesses, recordings, documentation. I am not giving them a technicality to slip through. Loud and clear, Tyler said. I sat in the dark car a moment longer. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt genuine danger. I could handle the smears and the insults, but when they brought in fixers and blackmailers, it meant they were out of options and ready to cross the line into felonies. I looked out at the city and repeated a mantra to keep myself grounded. Asterisk. Do not be afraid. The moment you show fear, they drag you into the mud. Asterisk. I wasn't afraid. But being fearless doesn't mean being reckless. I needed a trap so airtight they couldn't squirm out of it, and a strike so fast it ended the war in one blow. I drove to a secure corporate satellite office, not my home, and summoned my inner circle for a midnight war room meeting. Megan, David, and Tyler arrived quickly, escorted by security. Once the doors were locked, I didn't waste time. They are deploying 2 weapons, a PR smear campaign and criminal extortion. We need 2 counterweapons, irrefutable evidence, and a kill shot. If we strike, we end this permanently. No loose ends. Megan nodded fiercely, her eyes red from exhaustion. David had his laptop open, already typing. Tyler remained quiet, but his mind was racing. I recounted the blackmail call and the threat about the USB drive. Tyler looked up, his expression grim. Boss, the guy on the phone isn't a street thug. I ran a quick trace. The voice and the burner number matched Derek Mac Miller. He's a known crisis PR fixer who specializes in corporate blackmail, deepfakes, and extortion. He's been sued before, but he always finds a loophole. Hearing the name Derek Miller crystallized the situation. Harrison wasn't just acting out. He had hired a professional extortionist to break me. Then we dig him a legal grave, I said without hesitation. I'm going to pretend to agree to the payoff. David immediately objected. Meeting him is too high risk, Chloe. It's high risk if I go alone to a dark alley, I countered. But if I pick a high-end private club with hidden cameras, have legal counsel present, and execute a notarized sting, he's a dead man walking, Tyler asked. Location? The Vanguard Club. I have a private VIP room there. We control the environment, the cameras, and the exits. David jumped in with the legal strategy. Tell him you're terrified of a leak and want to meet privately to sign an NDA and hand over the cash. When he produces the USB or demands the wire transfer, we record the extortion in real time. Exactly, I said, but ensure everything follows wiretap and extortion recording laws in New York. We don't want the evidence thrown out. David nodded. I'll coordinate with Harvey to have a private investigator and an independent witness there. We do it by the book. Megan shifted the focus back to the financials, her voice sharp. I'll finalize the embezzlement dossier. 3 transfers to the Vance-affiliated LLC, IP logs, authorization timestamps, all cross-referenced with the corporate bylaws. I'll also pull the fraudulent invoices he used to justify the wires to prove premeditated theft. Make it bulletproof, I told her. No emotions, just data. David added a final, devastating blow. There's one thing stronger than a police report. The morality clause in your father's trust. The clause explicitly states that if the proxy engages in embezzlement, fraud, or breach of fiduciary duty, they forfeit all severance, are permanently banned from the board, and lose all executive privileges across all subsidiaries. I'm adding that to tomorrow's emergency board of directors meeting. Hearing that, a shiver ran down my spine. My father truly possessed incredible foresight. He didn't teach me how to seek revenge. He taught me how to sever a greedy man's oxygen supply. Do it. I agreed. And send out an internal memo announcing a special audit. Don't name Harrison. Just state we are reviewing all digital signatures and fund transfers due to irregularities. Whoever is guilty will panic and try to cover their tracks. And covering tracks always leaves a wider trail. Tyler smiled faintly. Classic squeeze. Panic makes people stupid. The meeting seemed to be wrapping up, but Tyler suddenly placed a burner phone on the table and hit play. You need to hear this first, boss. The audio was crisp. It was Harrison's voice. I would know it anywhere. It sounded cold, calculating. He was talking to someone, likely Mia, asterisk. It doesn't matter if the pregnancy is real or not. What matters is that we use it to break her. Asterisk. I froze. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The pregnancy might be real, it might be fake, but they were weaponizing it as a noose around my neck. I understood why Mia was bold enough to livestream, why she faked a medical emergency. They viewed the unborn child as the ultimate shield, knowing that American public opinion fiercely protects pregnant women. Megan looked at me, horrified. Chloe, do we leak this immediately? No, I said firmly. This is a silver bullet. If we leak it now, they'll spin it. They'll claim it's AI or taken out of context. We deploy it at the exact right time, in the exact right place, in front of the exact right people. David understood. The board meeting, yes? I nodded. In front of the shareholders, the lawyers, and the stenographer. So they can never backtrack. I picked up my phone and texted Harrison a short, calculated bait message. Asterisk. If you want to talk, come to the emergency board meeting tomorrow. Asterisk. Minutes later, he replied, the text dripping with desperate rage. Asterisk. Don't think you've won. I have leverage that will destroy you. Asterisk. I smirked, typed a single sentence, and hit send. Asterisk, I have leverage too, but I don't use it to make threats. Asterisk. I looked at my team. Tomorrow, I present the evidence to the entire board. We hit him on 3 fronts: the embezzlement, the PR extortion, and the fake pregnancy blackmail. Tyler stood up. I'll handle board security. Nobody disrupts the meeting. Megan closed her laptop. Financials will be finalized by 9 a.m. David nodded. The resolutions are drafted and legally bulletproof. We adjourned near midnight. As I walked down the quiet hallway, my phone rang. It was an unknown number from the Upper East Side clinic. A frantic nurse was on the line. Miss Sterling, we have a Mia Lawson in the ER. She claims she's having a miscarriage and she's telling everyone it's your fault. I stopped in my tracks. They really weren't resting. They were escalating the drama to attempted manslaughter. I gripped my phone, staring at my reflection in the dark glass windows. Asterisk. Fine. Asterisk, I thought. Asterisk. You want to play this to the bitter end? I will accommodate you. But tomorrow, I will let you collapse on the very stage you built. Asterisk. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Holdings headquarters before the sun was fully up. Last night's call from the ER told me they were going for the nuclear option. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't issue frantic denials. I merely texted Harvey. Asterisk. Have our defamation countersuit ready. The board meeting today is the finale. Asterisk. The atmosphere in the executive boardroom was ice cold. The mahogany table was packed with shareholders' familiar faces that suddenly seemed distant, likely because they had all seen the viral videos painting me as a ruthless, power-hungry monster. I saw questioning glances. Some maintained a neutral poker face, while others frowned, waiting to see if I would explode or grovel. I did neither. I opened my laptop, placed my dossiers on the table, and nodded to the corporate secretary. Everything today is strictly on the record, minute every second. Who speaks, who objects, record it all. Just as the chairman of the board was about to call the meeting to order, the heavy double doors swung open. Harrison Vance strode in. Exactly 10 minutes late, a calculated power move to show he was still a VIP. Behind him trailed his mother, Patricia, and a slick man in a gray suit carrying an expensive leather briefcase. Harrison projected his voice so it echoed off the glass walls. I am here to demand justice, not to sit through a revenge tribunal orchestrated by a bitter ex-wife. A murmur ran through the room. A few board members looked at me. I remained perfectly still, signaling the secretary to begin recording. The calmer I was, the harder it would be for him to drag me into his emotional circus. The man in the gray suit stepped forward. I am Arthur Sterling, Mr. Vance's legal counsel. We demand an immediate injunction on the termination of Harrison Vance. The actions taken seizing his residences, freezing his assets, revoking his corporate title are vindictive maneuvers designed to steal marital assets. I let out a dry, chilling laugh. I made sure every word was crystal clear to the room. Marital assets? Those are corporate assets belonging to Sterling Holdings. Were you planning to use a billion-dollar conglomerate as your divorce settlement fund, Arthur? A few of the major shareholders smirked, instantly recognizing the absurdity of Harrison's claim. Harrison slammed his hand on the table, his eyes bloodshot, playing the victim card hard. Don't spin this, Chloe! You evicted me and canceled my cards right in front of my pregnant partner. You tried to publicly humiliate me. He emphasized humiliate as if this boardroom were a moral high court and he was the martyr. Patricia took her cue, bringing a tissue to her eyes and forcing out a loud sob. I looked at Harrison, speaking with a slow, deliberate cadence. You are humiliated because you committed infidelity and corporate theft. Not because I took my keys back. The room grew heavy. A few people looked down, others let out a breath. Harrison choked on his words but kept fighting. This is a private family matter. Why are you dragging the company into this? I'm not talking about the family, I shot back. I'm talking about the company. Because you dragged the company into this the second you authorized those fraudulent wire transfers. Patricia wailed louder, her voice shrill. She's a monster. She's trying to kill my unborn grandchild. She's driving us to ruin. I turned to her, refusing to engage in a shouting match. I knew women like her thrived on chaos. I stared at her for a single second. then pivoted to the one thing she couldn't argue with: hard data. Megan. The financial report. Megan Thorne stood up and activated the projector. The massive screen displayed 3 exorbitant wire transfers from Sterling Holdings to a newly incorporated LLC. The transfers were dated just days before Harrison filed for divorce. The amounts were massive enough to make every shareholder in the room sit up straight. Whispers broke out. "What company is that?" someone muttered. Eyes darted toward Harrison, the mood shifting rapidly. Harrison went pale but tried to bluff. "Those are standard vendor payments. It's an acquisitions consultant. Completely routine." I raised a hand, cutting off the debate, and signaled David. David stood, his voice ringing out like a judge reading a verdict. "The receiving LLC was incorporated 3 weeks ago. The registered agent is a relative of Patricia Vance. There are no executed contracts, no deliverables, only fraudulent invoices. The digital signature authorizing the wires belongs to Harrison Vance. We have the IP logs." David clicked the remote. A new slide appeared. Timestamps, IP addresses, and the exact approval matrix trail. There was no room for routine errors. The boardroom went dead silent. Patricia stopped crying, staring at the screen in horror, realizing her family was directly implicated. Arthur, the lawyer, stammered, trying to deflect. This requires an independent audit to verify." I tilted my head. "Verify whatever you want. But while you're verifying, who assumes the fiduciary liability for the shareholders?" That sentence snapped the room back to reality. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was corporate embezzlement. I stared Harrison down. "Were you planning to drain the accounts, finalize the divorce, and leave me to face the SEC?" Harrison ground his teeth, desperation making him reckless. "Do you have proof of intent, Chloe?" He thought that if I only had the paper trail, he could still argue gross negligence instead of malice. I looked at him and said simply, "Yes. And I'm going to show it right now." I nodded to Tyler, who was standing by the AV console. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Everyone knew whatever was coming next would be the nail in the coffin. Tyler didn't say a word. He plugged a drive into the system and opened a video file. It was the hidden camera footage from the Vanguard Club last night. The video was pristine. No edits, no blur. On the screen, Derek Mac Miller sat across from me in a private booth, spinning a USB drive on the table. He smirked, his voice dripping with sleaze. "Asterisk. You want this to go away? Wire $2 million. Otherwise, the press gets the files tomorrow. Your call. Miss Sterling. Asterisk." On screen, I didn't argue. I just asked calmly. Asterisk. "You are extorting me." Asterisk. Mac shrugged. Asterisk. "Call it whatever you want. I provide a service. You want peace. You pay for it. Asterisk. You want peace, Maison. IMNN. The boardroom exploded. Shareholders sat up, some cursing under their breath. I didn't let them lose focus. I spoke over the noise, projecting clearly. This meeting was recorded legally, with independent counsel present and a notarized affidavit. The USB drive has been secured and logged into evidence for the FBI. I turned to Harrison. "You didn't just steal from this company. You hired a professional extortionist to blackmail me and sabotage Sterling Holdings." Harrison shot out of his chair, panicking as if he'd been shot. "I don't know who that guy is. You set this up." Arthur, the lawyer, frantically tried to intervene. "This is the action of an independent rogue actor. You cannot tie this to my client." I didn't argue. I just looked at Tyler again. Tyler clicked the next file, an audio recording. Harrison's voice echoed through the boardroom speakers, raw and vicious. Asterisk, call Mac. Tell him to run the smear campaign. Bury her until she's terrified. Once she's scared, she'll sign over the shares. The silence that followed was deafening. A senior board member, a man who rarely spoke, slammed his fist on the table and glared at Harrison with utter disgust. "Mister, Vance, do you think this company is your personal mafia playground? You use the CEO's office to hire a fixer to destroy the chairwoman? Harrison's face went from flushed red to chalk white. He looked wildly at his lawyer, but Arthur had stepped back, effectively abandoning ship. Patricia was trembling, violently twisting the tissue in her hands. "You can call me vindictive," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But you can't say the evidence is fake." Backed into a corner with no escape, Harrison played his final, desperate card. He looked toward the door and gestured frantically. The doors opened, and Mia was practically dragged into the room. She was clutching her stomach, looking pale and fragile, eyes brimming with tears. Harrison grabbed her hand and addressed the room. A final, theatrical plea. "She is carrying my child. Because of Chloe's relentless persecution, she was hospitalized last night. If she loses this baby, who takes responsibility?" It was a calculated move, aiming for the deep-seated empathy people have for pregnant women, hoping to dilute the financial crimes with a human tragedy. Mia blinked, tears spilling over, and sobbed, "I just want, please, Chloe, leave us alone. I don't want any of your money." It sounded heartbreaking, but I saw the calculation behind her tears. I didn't cut her off immediately. I let her finish her performance, then let my words drop like anvils. Peace isn't built on extortion. I stared dead into Mia's eyes, then looked at Harrison. "Did you really think dragging a fetus into this room grants you immunity from federal crimes?" The atmosphere turned oppressive. I gave Tyler the final signal. This wasn't a video. It was the ultimate silver bullet I had saved. Harrison's voice boomed from the speakers, unmistakable and damning. Asterisk. "It doesn't matter if the pregnancy is real or not. What matters is that we use it to break her." Asterisk. The room froze. People gasped. A few shareholders stared at Mia, their pity instantly morphing into profound disgust. Mia stood petrified, blinking rapidly like she had been slapped. Harrison looked like his soul had left his body. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia flinched violently, her hands shaking. I took a half-step forward, my voice radiating a bone-chilling coldness. "Tell the truth, Mia. Are you pregnant, or are you acting?" Mia panicked. She looked at Harrison, desperate for help, and in her sheer terror, her brain short-circuited. She blurted out, "Harrison, you told me to do it! You said if I played the victim, she would back off!" She had just confessed in front of the entire board of directors. Patricia snapped. She lunged forward, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Shut your mouth, you stupid bitch! Are you trying to send us all to prison?" Her shrieking shattered the refined Upper East Side facade she had worn for years, exposing the vicious, greedy woman beneath. I had no interest in watching them tear each other apart. I turned to the chairman, my voice commanding and absolute. I motioned for the immediate, permanent suspension of Harrison Vance from all corporate duties and subsidiaries. I motioned to turn this entire dossier over to the district attorney and the SEC for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and extortion. I paused, looking around the room, making sure my final words were engraved in the minutes. And let the record reflect that they have openly admitted to fabricating a medical crisis to commit blackmail. In that moment, I watched Harrison collapse into his chair, looking like a man whose legs had been cut out from under him. I didn't feel triumphant. I just realized one absolute truth. When you choose to play in the mud to win, you will eventually drown in it. Right on the very stage you built. For a few seconds after I requested the confession be entered into the minutes, the boardroom was completely silent. Then, the silence shattered. Some people were in shock, others furious, and some were frantically calculating how this scandal would impact the stock price. Harrison sat slumped in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. I thought he would finally surrender, but when a person is pushed to the absolute brink, they often try to drag everyone else down with them. Harrison shot up, his voice hoarse but screaming loud enough for the whole room. "You think you're so innocent? You hid your identity from the beginning. You played the poor, working-class girl to trap me. You lied to me for years." He hurled the words like stones, hoping the mud would stick to me. A few shareholders glanced my way, no longer curious, but waiting to see how I would deflect. I didn't need to think. I answered instantly, clean and sharp. I didn't lie to trap you. I tested your character, and you failed. That single sentence decapitated his attempt to shift the narrative from corporate fraud to marital ethics. Arthur, his lawyer, desperately tried to intervene, attempting to steer his client back to legal reality. Members of the board, Miss. Sterling's personal background has no bearing on the financial allegations. The transfers and the PR issues remain separate legal matters. Harrison, completely unhinged, snatched Arthur's leather briefcase, yanked out a prepared stack of papers, and slammed them onto the table. This is a formal grievance. Chloe manipulated her power to illegally terminate me. She is using her position as chairwoman to destroy my livelihood. David Quinn didn't even ask for permission to speak. He stood up, his voice radiating the icy detachment of a seasoned corporate litigator. The termination resolution was signed by the board, meeting the exact quorum required by the corporate charter. Mr. Vance was terminated for cause specifically, gross misconduct and fiduciary breach. Have you not read the bylaws you were hired to uphold? David clicked a button, and the specific termination clause flashed on the screen. It made Harrison's argument look utterly ridiculous. Harrison stood frozen, turning to his mother as a last resort. Patricia, true to form, resorted to brawling with words. She pointed a trembling finger at a senior shareholder. You're all in her pocket. You're taking her money. That's why you're protecting her. You hypocrites! Her voice was shrill, trying to turn the boardroom into a reality TV screaming match. The senior shareholder, a silver-haired man who rarely intervened, stared her down. He delivered one sentence that brought the room to a standstill. Say one more word, ma'am, and I will personally sue you for defamation. That shut Patricia up instantly. She was used to bullying her daughter-in-law in the privacy of her home, but faced with billionaires and high-powered attorneys, her bravado evaporated. I thought Harrison would sit down, but his desperation made him reckless. Just as he opened his mouth, Megan Thorne stood up, her voice hitting the room like a sledgehammer. I have one more addendum. Every head turned. Megan looked at the chairman and projected a new bank statement onto the screen. We have uncovered a corporate loan initiated with a Tier 1 bank. The signatory is Harrison Vance. The stated purpose was capital development. However, the dispersed funds were immediately routed to an escrow account controlled by Derek Mac Miller. The name times Derek Miller times appearing a second time was the fatal blow. If the 3 previous transfers could be poorly excused as consulting fees, this was undeniably criminal. Taking out a corporate loan, creating debt for the company, and using the cash to pay a blackmailer. This wasn't just greed. It was active sabotage. Harrison turned the color of ash. His mouth opened, but he could only stutter. No, that wasn't me. I didn't. But the harder he stuttered, the guiltier he looked. He turned to Arthur, his eyes begging for a legal lifeline. But Arthur just stood there, rigid. You can't fast-talk your way out of federal bank records. I stood up, staring Harrison down, delivering the final verdict without raising my voice. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Sterling Holdings. You took out fraudulent loans in the company's name to fund a smear campaign against it. Did you plan on letting thousands of employees carry the debt for your extortion ring? The chairman of the board had heard enough. He banged his gavel, his voice booming with authority. Mr. Vance, you are out of order. Security, escort him from the building. The board will proceed without him. Hearing the word escort, Harrison lost his mind. Nobody touches me. I am still an executive of this company. He lunged toward the chairman's seat, trying to grab the microphone. Tyler stepped into his path. He didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He stood like a monolith and spoke with absolute authority. You are causing a disturbance. I have the legal right to physically remove you per building protocol and the chairman's directive. You walk out that door, or I drag you out. 2 security guards flanked him. Harrison thrashed, but his aura of power had completely shattered. The room no longer saw a CEO. They saw a criminal being ousted in front of his peers. Mia was cowering in the corner, her face green. She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to go to federal prison. Patricia heard her. The older woman whipped around and delivered a vicious slap across Mia's face. Asterisk. Smack. Asterisk. Shut up. This is all your fault, you home-wrecking slut. Mia clutched her cheek and burst into genuine tears. The illusion of the tragic, victimized pregnant woman dissolved into a pathetic brawl. The boardroom felt like a war zone. Documents, ledgers, and resolutions on one side, screaming, tears, and physical violence on the other. And amidst the chaos, the truth was blindingly clear. The villains had unmasked themselves. I watched it happen without a drop of satisfaction. I only felt the cold reality that when the facade crumbles, nothing is left but sheer, ugly panic. The meeting ended in a heavy, oppressive silence. Once Harrison was dragged out, his screams fading down the hallway. The only sounds left were the secretary's rapid typing and the heavy sighs of the senior board members. I didn't linger to gloat. I sat down and systematically signed the necessary legal resolutions, knowing that any delay would give them a window to counterattack. That afternoon, the termination notice was published officially. Along with it went the criminal referrals to the SEC and the DA's office for wire fraud, embezzlement, and extortion. David executed it flawlessly. The paperwork went to the exact right agencies, with the exact right stamps. Tyler had security, trailing Harrison to prevent any further ambushes. Megan immediately notified the corporate banking partners to freeze all high-risk accounts and flag Harrison's previous transactions. It was an iron vault slamming shut. And when the vault closes, the person on the outside can do nothing but bash their head against the steel. What I didn't expect was how fast the media narrative flipped. Within hours, the raw security footage from the clinic was leaked to the press, overlaid with timestamps and camera angles, proving the viral video was a complete fabrication. The public sentiment swung violently. The internet, which had been calling for my head yesterday, was now demanding Harrison and Mia's arrest. Public outrage is a weather vane. It doesn't matter which way the wind blows, as long as your foundation is solid. Harrison tasted the bitter consequences instantly. The banks called him relentlessly, not to check in, but to notify him. His accounts were frozen pending federal review. His credit cards were declined. The 3 luxury Porsches were impounded by corporate asset recovery teams. I listened to the reports in silence. This wasn't petty revenge. This was the systemic recovery of stolen property. Some say a man fears losing his money, but he fears losing his pride even more. That day, Harrison lost both. He drove to the primary corporate penthouse, the place he considered his castle. He was stopped at the gate by the concierge. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. This property belongs to Sterling Holdings. You no longer have access." Harrison screamed, "I've lived here for years!" The concierge just repeated, "I'm following protocol, sir." He drove to the second penthouse, then the third. The same result. The doors locked him out, slapping him with the reality that his empire only existed because I had allowed it to. Late that afternoon, while I was reviewing the final injunctions with Harvey, my phone rang. It was Harrison. I stared at the screen for a moment, before answering. His voice was harsh, but the aggression was masked by a tremor. "Are you happy now?" I didn't mince words. "No. Because the debt you owe isn't just financial." Dead silence on the line. I heard his ragged breathing, then the sound of him grinding his teeth. "Do you want me to die, Chloe?" I replied with brutal honesty. "Whether you survive or not is your choice. I'm just done paying the bill for your mistakes." I hung up. That night, I was working late at the headquarters. The security desk called up. "Miss Sterling, Mr. Vance, and an older woman are here asking to see you." I knew exactly who it was. I didn't let them up to the executive suite. I had them escorted to a small, ground floor reception room, equipped with security cameras and a guard stationed outside. I didn't do it out of fear of physical violence. I did it because I was done entertaining their theatrical performances. Harrison walked in first. He didn't look like the arrogant CEO anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Patricia trailed behind him, her posture shrunken, completely devoid of the haughty, elite mother-in-law persona she used to wear like armor. The moment she saw me, her tone shifted dramatically to a sickeningly sweet plea. "Chloe, sweetheart, consider it my fault. I'm old." I spoke out of turn. I was foolish. She reached out to grab my hands. I pulled my hands back, looked her in the eye, and spoke slowly. "You weren't wrong because you're old, Patricia. You were wrong because you're greedy." The words choked her. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, and stammered, I was just looking out for my son." I didn't argue. I just looked at her like one looks at a person waking up from a delusion of grandeur. Harrison stood there for a few seconds, then abruptly stepped forward. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat, and then, right in front of me, he dropped to his knees. The man who had slammed tables at board meetings, the man who had publicly humiliated me in the lobby, was now kneeling on the cold tile floor. His voice cracked. "Chloe, I was wrong. Forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't think it would end up like this." I didn't flinch. I just felt a profound sadness. Sadness because he wasn't kneeling out of remorse. He was kneeling because he had run out of options. I let the silence hang for a few seconds so he could hear his own pathetic breathing. Then I delivered the coldest, truest statement of the night. "You're kneeling because you're cornered, Harrison. Not because you're sorry." Harrison froze. Tears genuinely welled in his eyes and spilled over. But even as he cried, his true nature slipped out. "I still have my dignity. Chloe, please don't blow this up completely. Tell me what you want me to sign. Just don't leave me with nothing." I looked down at him. "You shredded your own dignity the moment you took your mistress to a prenatal clinic 15 minutes after signing our divorce papers." Harrison bowed his head. Patricia collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. I knew what she was really terrified of. If the federal investigation dug deep enough, her relatives and her own complicity would put her in the crosshairs. Just then, Tyler texted me a quick update with a photo attachment. Asterisk. Clinic records verified. Asterisk. I didn't open the image. I just read the preview text. Asterisk Mia Lawson admitted for mild abdominal cramps and panic attack. No risk of miscarriage. Signed, AMA. Against medical advice. Waiver for creating a disturbance. Asterisk. In other words, the entire miscarriage ER drama was just another act. I put my phone face down on the table and looked at them. "How long did you plan on keeping up the act?" Patricia gasped, realizing the jig was completely up. She muttered, almost involuntarily, "Oh my God! My son ruined his life for that trash." She glared at Harrison, her eyes full of a toxic mix of rage and terror, realizing for the first time just how incredibly stupid her son really was. I looked at Harrison, my voice devoid of anger, leaving only cold clarity. "You made your choice. You chose her. And you chose the trap." Harrison, still on his knees, begged, his voice cracking. "Just give me 10 minutes, Chloe. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please, don't throw me out on the street." I looked at him and felt no joy. I only saw a broken man begging for the exact things he used to treat with contempt. And I knew the rest of this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about closing the ledger, neatly and legally, so they could never pollute my life again. "You have 10 minutes, I said, "but not to reconcile. 10 minutes to finalize your exit." Harrison looked up, his eyes red, while Patricia sat curled in the chair, unable to make eye contact. I pulled out a chair, sat across from him, and signaled the guard to bring in the prepared legal dossier. There were no threats, no screaming, Just white paper, black ink, and reality. I pushed the settlement agreement toward him. Read it. If you truly want the bleeding to stop. Harrison's hands shook as he turned the first page. He didn't even make it halfway before he choked. You're making me pay it all back? I gave a slight nod. Restitution. Every cent you embezzled. You will cooperate fully with the federal investigation, provide all data on the shell companies and middlemen, and withdraw your frivolous injunctions. I paused, locking eyes with him. And you will issue a formal, public apology to the employees of Sterling Holdings for the hostile work environment and the corporate sabotage. He bit his lip. An apology? To the staff? They'll laugh me out of the city. I didn't mock him. I just stated the facts. My voice quiet. You're terrified of people laughing at you, but you weren't terrified of destroying my life? Dignity isn't something you keep by shouting. You keep it by living an honorable life. Saying those words, I felt like I had finally crossed the finish line of a grueling marathon. I wasn't trying to teach him a lesson. I was reminding myself. Everything had to end in absolute clarity. Harrison stared at the paper, tears dropping onto the ink. He picked up the pen. He dropped it twice because his hands were shaking so badly. Finally, he looked up at me, his voice a hoarse whisper. Do you really not love me anymore? The question sent a microscopic pang through my chest, like touching an old, faded scar. I stayed silent for a moment, then answered with the most honest words I had left. I do. I love the version of myself from the past. The woman who trusted you, who endured for you, who blamed herself for everything. But as for you, I feel absolutely nothing. Saying it aloud made my throat feel lighter. There are some truths that, if left unspoken, will weigh you down forever. Harrison lowered his head and signed. His signature wasn't fast and arrogant like it was at the courthouse. It was the jagged scrawl of a man with no exits left. Patricia watched him, her eyes sunken, terrified of the price of her own greed. I slid the paperwork back, turning briefly to Patricia. Not to make her sign anything, but to deliver a message I had swallowed for years. I spoke slowly, ensuring she heard every syllable. You once told me that a woman who can't bear children is useless. But you forgot something, Patricia. A woman doesn't need to give birth to have value. Patricia didn't respond. She stared at the floor, her lips trembling as if she wanted to snap back out of habit. But she didn't. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she realized that words could slowly kill a person without drawing blood. Just as Harrison put the pen down, my phone buzzed. It was Harvey Klein. I didn't put it on speaker. I just listened, keeping my eyes on Harrison. Harvey's message was brief, but it hit like a gavel. Asterisk Chloe. The morality clause in the trust has been fully triggered. Because the acting proxy engaged in verifiable embezzlement, all of his vested stock options and executive severance packages are legally forfeit. Per your father's instructions, those funds will be automatically reallocated to the Richard Sterling Memorial Scholarship Fund. Harrison has no legal standing to claim a single cent. Asterisk. I hung up the phone. The room was so quiet it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out. Harrison looked up, eyes wide. What is it? I looked at him, my voice completely flat. You get nothing. My father planned for this contingency years ago. I didn't add asterisk, serves you right asterisk or asterisk, you deserve this. Asterisk, I just gave him the facts. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't revenge. It's the realization that the trap you fell into was written into the rules years ago, just waiting for your greed to activate it. Harrison slumped back against the wall, his face the color of chalk. Patricia looked entirely drained, her hands gripping the armrests in quiet despair. I stood up, gathered the signed documents, and nodded to the security guard. Thank you. Process the rest according to protocol. I didn't want to watch a man break any longer. I had seen enough. I walked out of the reception room and passed through the grand lobby, the exact spot where Harrison had shattered the glass to frame me. Tonight, The lobby was identical. The lights were bright, the marble polished. The only difference was the absence of the noise. The late shift staff looked up and nodded at me. I knew it wasn't out of fear, it was out of trust. A quiet acknowledgement that there was still someone at the helm who held the line. As I got into the back of my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk Chloe. It's Mia. I'm so sorry. Harrison manipulated me. I was just following his lead. Asterisk. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. I didn't know if she was genuinely remorseful or just terrified of the federal indictments. But it didn't matter anymore. I typed a single, unemotional reply. Asterisk. When you make a mistake, you pay the price. Don't make a career out of playing the victim. Asterisk. I deleted the text thread, erasing the noise from my life for good. That night, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. Those millions of tiny lights reminded me of who I used to be: small, insignificant, believing that if I just endured enough, I could hold on to my marriage, my home, my peace. But peace isn't something someone else hands you. Peace is the fortress you build yourself by having the courage to stand up straight, the courage to say no, and the courage to take absolute control of your own life. I didn't feel a rush of vindictive joy. I just felt incredibly light. On the day of the divorce, they thought I had lost everything. But the truth was, the only thing I truly got back that day was myself.